Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Love from NDTI, and I'm talking about something called small supports. When my colleagues said, would I come and talk about small supports? I think my immediate response to them is, yes, of course, how many hours do I have? And their response is, you have 20 minutes and you're not allowed to talk for longer. So I am going to be racing through this. And I think what it would probably do is, I hope what we can do in the next sort of just under 20 minutes is give you an idea of something that is a very different form of housing and support for people, but hopefully for a wider group of people, give you a bit of an idea about what we can do, which is about actually setting up things that are more radical when it comes to housing and support. If we're really frustrated with the quality of what's currently available. So all you need to know about this bit is that we are a partnership between a number of different organisations. And what I wanted to do today was really describe a community-based alternative for people with hefty reputations and share some observations with you about market development. Let's just unpick for a minute what we mean by hefty reputations. Okay, there are a group of young people and adults who end up being sent away to secure accommodation, who it might be that they get sent away to secure educational establishments or secure schools. It might be that they get sent away to assessment and treatment units or to secure special hospitals. But they're a group of people who, from their teenage years onwards, develop these reputations that are quite often really unfair. Quite often they're people who can hurt themselves or they can hurt people around them. They're people whose services fail continually. They're people who quite often cost a lot of money, and there's some quite kind of unpleasant labels that are given to people about people who have challenging behaviour and that sort of stuff. And we're not actually willing to accept that. We believe that there are a group of people who have a right to really good quality community-based lives, but they're being stopped from doing that because they have these incredibly hefty reputations. So I'm just going to say people with hefty reputations. Right, our starting point to this is we tried to think, why is it that we constantly fail? And when I say we, I mean the whole system constantly fails with coming up with scalable alternatives for people with hefty reputations, for people who sit on the margins of services. So we decided that the first thing we needed to do is get the system to actually be really honest about the group of people it was failing. And our starting point is we believe that we have consistently failed a large group of people who have hefty reputations. Really publicly, we've had Winterbourne View, we've had Walton Hall, we've had some recent stories on the BBC about people who've been locked away for 10 or 20 years. Less publicly, we have young people who are being sent away to secure schools and are being sent away to assessment and treatment units. So we have to start with absolute honesty that says what we are currently providing for a group of people is failing them. And unless we do something different, we will continue to fail that group of people. So we started asking questions about why are we failing people? When we spent all this time trying to develop alternatives, why are we failing people? And I tend to work in analogies quite a lot of the time. And I just had this instinct that most market development, most service development kind of felt like somebody was walking down a high street and saying, we've got Asda, we've got Tesco's, we've got Morrison's. People need more choice, so let's get somebody to open a Sainsbury's. And the reality is, opening that Sainsbury's hasn't offered people any more choice at all. It's exactly the same model as the other supermarkets. It is just branded a little bit differently. And when it's so keeping with that kind of shopping analogy, what real choice for people is, some people might want to go to a big out of town supermarket. Some people might want to go to their corner grocery shop. Some people might want to walk along a marketplace, kind of choosing things at random, and some people might want to grow their own. So when we're talking about offering people real choice when it comes to services, we actually have to have a starting point which understands the huge range of choices that people need. Why hasn't that happened? I love talking about Theseus's paradox. My colleagues are going, oh, is he really going to talk about this again? I don't know whether people know Theseus, but Theseus was this old Greek bloke who sat in harbours. And he was a thinker. Oddly, I saw quite recently one of these big sword and sandal epics on telly, where Theseus was this buff warrior, and you just thought, I'm absolutely not sure he was. But Theseus was this elderly Greek guy who sat in harbours. And over the course of 20 years, he noticed that on the ships, everything had changed. The sails were different. The rigging had been replaced. The boarding had been replaced. The crew had been replaced. But his paradox is the ship looks exactly the same as it did 20 years ago. So what we're saying is that if you want to do something radical when it comes to housing and support for people, you need to ask yourself the question, are we spending a lot of energy just creating a different version of what we already have? Or are we spending our energy creating something which is genuinely radically new and different? So what we did is we went out and had a wander. We went and we kind of have this belief that you learn more from people doing great stuff than you do from people doing bad stuff, but our system tends to highlight the negative. So we went, the first thing we did is we went and looked at people who are providing really, really poor quality housing and support for people with hefty reputations. And what we noticed was, when it comes to people who are designing and buying services, there's a lot of people who don't actually know what good looks like, who can describe what they've got locally. But when you say to them, tell me what really, really good looks like, people are hesitant. It's this, well, because we have it, I'm identifying it as good, rather than having a language and a knowledge of what's possible, which allows me to really, really identify what good looks like. The other thing we noticed in a lot of people who are in statutory development and commissioning roles, that a lot of people don't know how to create good. We've almost developed this way of working where when you want services for people, you go out with a checkbook and buy what somebody else has created, rather than creating what you think good should be. And we also looked at some providers who we thought were failing people, and these housing and support providers. And we identified that quite a lot of providers out there who aren't that great at knowing what good looks like. And when you ask for their evidence base about the service they provide, what they tend to do is they tend to say, well, we are a good service because we've been doing this for 10 years and we support 100 people. And you're kind of saying, I'm sorry, that doesn't mean you're a good service. It just means you've got a successful business model. We also found that there are a group of young people and adults who absolutely need incredibly person-centered support. But what we've got these specialist secure services who kind of put this person-centered, this personalized veneer over really traditional services. Much more importantly, we then found people who were doing really exciting stuff. And so what we found from them, people who are buying, who are commissioning really exciting stuff, and you'll have guessed this from the last slide we used, they know what great can be. They've been out there, they have looked for great in other places, they've found great. They've kind of unpeeled that onion that says, don't just give me 15 minutes on what you do. Tell me how you're provided, tell me how you're commissioned, tell me how you work with your staff, tell me how you stay good. So they knew what great could be. And they were also, they saw their roles as commissioners, as strategists. They saw their roles as, well, if great doesn't exist locally, then we need to do everything we can to create great. It's not about buying great, it's creating great. We then looked at providers and we found some really, really interesting providers. And what we kind of found from them is they have a really good knowledge and evidence base of what really good services and support looks like. They will be tied into lots and lots of other really, really interesting people. And they will be absolutely committed to doing whatever it takes to create, to be the great support providers that people with hefty reputations need. So that's just a little bit of the background stuff. So let me quickly walk you through what we think is a rather different model around housing and support for people with very hefty reputations. And we keep talking about people with hefty reputations, but we actually believe that this is a style of working that would work better with so many other people. The starting point has to be the individual. From the very first steps, the individual and their family, it's this old person-centered thing. People who know, love and care have as much control as they possibly can have. And that those person-centered conversations are what we use to guide the planning. We are not led in our planning around people by the risks they bring us, by the reputations they have. Those are really important when it comes to defining the support. But if you want to work really well with those young people who are currently in those segregated, secure schools, we have to think more about what great support looks like, what great housing looks like, and then we think about the risks that come with those people. We also know that people who have spent time in secure schools and secure residential settings are probably going to want something very different in 18 months' time than what they want now, because those settings are incredibly disempowering for people. So the starting point is you listen to the individual, you listen to who knows them, loves them and cares about them. And from that, you will then have conversations which look at things like risk. Those great services who support people with hefty reputations, they don't compromise. There is an absolute understanding that the moment you compromise the support you offer to those people, it is when things start going wrong. We've looked at younger and older people who've ended up in that secure system. And if you look at what's happened in their lives, the commissioning decisions that have been made for so many of them are a series of compromises which have led them to being in places that are never going to support them. So everyone makes a decision that says, we will not compromise what we do with and for this person. What we've also learned about those people with the most hefty reputations is great big staff teams don't work. You employ staff who are recruited around one individual, because they bring what that individual needs. So for example, if Alice and I were both saying this is what great support would look like for us, we would have more differences than we have similarities. And if you wanted to provide us with great support, you would have to meet those differences. So if Alice had a passion for football and wanted the people who are involved in providing her with support to also have a passion for football, that's as important for Alice as for me having a passion for people who like spending hours wandering across Dartmoor. We've also learned that great support is not provided by staff who work in lots of people's teams, that you recruit staff around the individual, and they might do a bit of work in other people's teams, but their absolute focus is on that individual. Curiously, what we've learned in COVID is this staffing model, the organisations, small sports organisations who've been adopting this staffing model have had less people who have caught COVID. People need absolute choice of where they live. People need to choose who they live with, if anyone, and they need to choose where they live. And people are tenants, they're owners, they live with their family. That doesn't matter, but there is a complete separation of housing and support. So what that means is, if you're my staff team and I live in the house I live in now, if I think you're brilliant, but I hate my house, let's move to a different house and you'll come with me. Also, if I like my house, but I think you're a bit of a rubbish support team, I'm going to sack you and I'm going to stay living in my house. So people have absolute control of where they live. The other thing that's incredibly important is that we have funding that is around the individual. Best thing we've come across, individual service funds. So the funding is around that person and is controlled by that person. So we don't take 5 or 6 people and we group them, or we don't kind of pay the fees to the service provider. We say, if you are going to be the people who support Alice, this is the funding that you and Alice have in order to create the support that she needs in her life. And that funding takes absolute account of changes that might happen because of behavior or all sorts of things that happen in people's lives. I'm gonna move on really fast the last couple
more minutes, Bill.
Yeah. What we've learned about, if you want really good support for people with hefty reputation, is always go to small organisations. Go to organisations where the person who runs that organisation can touch the sides of the organisation. The leadership, the management know every single person. And we would argue for people, that organisations who support people with complex needs should probably grow by no more than 3 people a year, and they should probably never support more than 20 to 30 people. The other thing we've learned is that if you want great, you need to just create great. Don't go shopping for it. Learn how to bend your local system so you can attract people to set up the great supports you want. And I'll shut up there, but I'll just leave you with, why do we call this small supports? And we've stolen this from Eleanor Roosevelt. So many good things are stolen from Eleanor Roosevelt. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and small they cannot be seen in any maps of the world, yet they are the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. A really inspiring talk. I particularly like that message around learn how to bend your local, offer. So thank you very much. I thought that was really inspiring.
Alice, one of the things that we would say to people who want to create something different is, if you see something that's really good in another place, they have set that up using exactly the same system that you have locally.
Yeah.
And what that means is they have bent the system. And what we're learning from working with local commissioners, families, providers and stuff like that is, there is almost nothing you can't do if you work to bend the system, and sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission.